do you remember in high school when they taught you about this thing called Maslow's hierarchy of needs? It's this pyramid that basically says you've got to fulfill the things at the bottom of the pyramid, at the bottom of the mountain first. You've got to have shelter. You've got to have food. And you can't go on to worry about occupation, finding a mate, other things like that until if you don't have shelter and food, those things become God, right? And then when you get more and more of these essential needs, it's not until you kind of fill the things that are at the bottom of the pyramid that you can explore transcendence and spirituality, which are at the top of the pyramid. So that's Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And so that's these things that have our physical needs met, survival needs met, are what David Brooks calls the first mountain. But the first mountain is also where we discover identity, ego, sense of self. You identify, hi, I'm David, I'm in marketing. Oh, hi David, I'm an econ major. I'm David, I'm the drummer. And you begin to wear these things almost like they're masks. And I'm not to imply that they're always bad, but the interesting thing about some of these identities and egos that we gather through our lives, and there are many identities that we can gather, it begs the question of who are we really? Who are we really inside? Are we just the mask? Am I just David the marketer? And what happens when I no longer work in marketing? Who am I then? How much of my identity do I attach to these things? These are all pursuits in this area called the first mountain. And as life gets better, we get better at traversing. We get better at traversing that mountain. We get better at earning money. We get better at establishing these identities, these containers, these things that some psychologists call, these are the things that contain our lives. They are the containers for us. They make us feel safe, but they give us structure. And we essentially build habits in this world of the first mountain, like collecting things. I've got this, whatever it is, and now I have 2 of them. And whether you're talking about shoes or drums or whatever, there's something that materialism comes into this world. This is the world of money and accomplishments and the shiny badges. One of my drum teachers used to say that. Oh yeah, that person likes to collect the shiny badges and wear them. I've done this and I've done that, and all the publicity and PR, and that becomes a part of our identity. And some of us get really hooked on these shiny badges. You ever meet somebody that when you meet them, the only thing they want to talk about is their shiny badges, what I've done, what I've accomplished, but who are you without all those things? And, one day I think that when we traverse that first mountain, we realize that the stuff on the first mountain doesn't feed our soul. I'm convinced that the first mountain doesn't have a summit. Everybody's trying to get to the summit. People are climbing Mount Everest, and they get up there and they realize, well, it's really overcrowded and it's a bunch of trash up there, but that's one analogy. But there is no summit. There is no satisfying point where you can say, I've reached the top of the mountain of this ego and identity, and I'm good now, because you always want something more. You get that raise, you want more. You get this possession, you want another. A singer gets a Grammy, they want another. That fulfillment, that happiness wears off, always seeking some other, often egoic pursuit. And there are people that have made it so far up the mountain, people who have mastered that first mountain. I'm thinking of perhaps Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and the 3,000 billionaires who are up there. And you know something? It's not good enough to be a billionaire nowadays. You have to be in the top 100 billionaires, or you have to be a part of the 100 billion club, right? Jeff Bezos has $200 billion, and Elon Musk has $274 billion as of last night. And you know something? That's not going to be good enough after a while. You know why? Because you It's going to happen, right? The Trillionaire Club is going to happen. And then there's the Space Club. Do you remember how everybody was trying to get to space, and all three of those guys, who was it? Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, and who's the guy from Virgin Atlantic? Richard Branson. They all had to go to space. They were all trying to get there first, and I'm wondering, some of that was for good, some of that was for humanity, but some of it maybe was for ego. I'm thinking they were really good at climbing the first mountain. So, and the first mountain is about things like, it's a contest. You know, just look on Facebook. It's about who's the sexiest, right? It's about who has the most virality to their social media posts. And so this you know, who's got the most power, who's got the most influence, who's the most famous, and you see it all around us, and young people, they see it, and how does that affect all of us as being the benchmark for success, the benchmark that belongs to the first mountain? So my thesis is that we end up bumming ourselves out because the goals of the first mountain are not our goals. They're the goals that society, some people call it mass consciousness, defined for us. They're not going to feed your soul. It's somebody else's idea of what is good. And those ideas will change over time. So it's someone else's dream that maybe we should stop living if we're there, lost on the first mountain. And so this is where I turn the page of my talk to this concept that David Brooks, he says, if we're lucky, we fall off the first mountain. Anybody ever familiar? Are you familiar with a time you fell, or you flailed, or failed on the first mountain, and you found yourself asking questions like, am I good enough? Am I worthy? Or what am I doing on this first mountain? So something knocks us on our rears, and some people might call it the dark night of the soul. Ever heard of that? The dark night of the soul? And we can have many dark nights of the soul. Midlife crises, I read several articles that said, there's not just one midlife crisis, there are many midlife crises, starting in your 20s, right? And going on, and just, you know, throughout all of our lives. We have these crises, and I think these crises are related somehow to this definition of what's been set up as what's good on the first mountain. But there's a concept that both David Brooks, oh, by the way, that's a picture of the book. all of my books are packed up, so I was going to have this book in my hand, but I cannot find it. So there's a picture of that book. But there's another book by Richard Rohr called Falling Upward, and Reverend Catherine Sachs mentioned it a few weeks ago. So there's this concept that in our failing, in our flailing, in our falling, we can fall upwards. We can fall upwards. But it takes a willingness to be in the valley. Instead of just getting right back up again and saying, you know, some people call it spiritual bypassing. It's all good, I'm all good, right? Spiritual bypassing. Instead of doing that, being with the pain, being with the lesson, being with whatever is going on in your feelings at that moment, maybe being with the trauma and asking, where did that trauma come from? Being with the string that someone else just pulled, asking, wait, why is that person pulling those strings? It's because I want them to pull those strings, because I want to grow as a person, right? That's one theory. So it's this willingness to be there from which we can propel ourselves and fall upwards through a little self-introspection and investigation. And David Brooks says we may discover that, okay, that first mountain, that was not my mountain to begin with. It was never my mountain to begin with. And I'm not going to give my power away to this mountain anymore. And so that's where I think that those of us on a spiritual path, we begin to not be satisfied with the world of the first mountain anymore. That's why we're here. We are sitting here in the sanctuary, not for the first mountain. We may be sitting here for the potluck, for the hospitality that's coming afterwards, but you know, we need that. We need both things on the first mountain. but we also here need the things from the second mountain, because the second mountain is a place that's so much more rewarding. Why? Because the joy that we find on the second mountain, which could be your spirituality, is lasting. You know, they say that's the difference between joy and happiness. Happiness is a dopamine hit. Happiness is, ooh, I opened my phone, got a dopamine hit off of, that post. Someone liked my post, right? There's a difference between happiness and joy. Joy can happen even as you're grieving. Joy is a permanent thing that grows and grows and grows in you, When I talk to Pat Kleinberg, in her presence and in her voice, I can hear that permanent joy in her soul. You agree with me? It's that you can hear it in her voice, that permanent joy that is never touched by anything. And I think all of us have that spark. So that's the second mountain. And David Brooks that says there are 4 hallmarks of the second mountain, 4 signs or indicators that we're there. And one of them is life calling. So Michael, it just so happened to be that he fulfills on the first mountain, he learned how to play the piano when you were how old? 5 years old, okay. And that was his container, that was his first mountain thing. He has lots of gigs everywhere all the time. But it's more than just a gig, right? It's your life calling. For me, the marketing world for me was just a gig. The marketing, high-tech world for me was so empty. And so it was a vocation, but it wasn't a life calling. It was a gig, it wasn't a life calling. So when you have a life calling, you're on the second mountain. When you have a philosophy or a faith, it doesn't have to be your religion, you're on the second mountain. Unity is considered by some a religion, but it's more thought of as a movement, a philosophy, a faith tradition. And so we're here fulfilling the needs of the second mountain. The other hallmark of the second mountain is community. Are you giving yourself away, as the song says, are you giving part of yourself to the community? Are you caring about the community? Does the community care about you? Are you doing things in service, in sacred service to that community? There's this word I mentioned a few weeks ago called seva, and I believe it's a Sanskrit. Oh, I should study these things before I talk about them. I think it's a Sanskrit word, but it might not be. I'll expound more on it. But seva, it basically means sacred service. So Jen she's not just clicking slides, she's being of sacred service because this is a part of what makes the service work. The ushers on the platform team, they're in sacred service. Juanita and Ruben and Ron, they're in sacred service. So all the things that we do, and just by us being here to participate, because without you, the service would not be the same. You're co-creating this. So you're giving sacred service to your soul by being in this spiritual practice today. That's the second mountain. And then the fourth thing is commitment to another, a family, a partner, another human being, a group of people, making an impact outside of ourselves. That's another sign of the second mountain. And I'll sum these things up by saying that the first mountain is about the individual. The second mountain is about the collective. It's about the community. It's about going outside of ourselves. The first mountain is about transitory happiness. It's fleeting. The second mountain is about permanent joy. That's David Brooks' book in a nutshell. And I don't think there's a falling off the second mountain. There's certainly a falling off that first mountain, right? Do you want to call it divorce, or you lose your job, or you lose whatever you ascribe to your identity, you lose that, you lose part of your health, right? The second mountain things cannot be touched. You cannot fall off the second mountain. So I'm feeling complete. Maybe there's a few more things I'd like to say, but Michael, would you help me out? Because I just want to hear just a few more chords from that. You know, that song, I Give Myself Away, is really a Second Mountain song, isn't it? You know, maybe play that chorus that's right in there. You know, the second mountain is about surrender. Just go in as we pray and just honor that there is this second mountain, that there is this place called Unity Spiritual Center, that there is this place that we can come to that's a community that knows only unconditional love, that knows only the highest and best in you. So I give myself away. I give myself away. I give away my ego. So Spirit can use me. Michael, would you sing that? Maybe that refrain.
I give myself away. I give myself away so you can use me.
Yeah.
I give myself away. I give myself away so you can use me.
So that's what the second mountain is all about. Just speaking to the heart. And if we listen during our meditations, that second mountain will always call us. It'll call us away from the first mountain for just a few minutes. That's why we're all here. I call it blessed, and so it is.